Let your eyes rest. Let the world outside fade away. Tonight, we return to a time where freedom was not a right but a dangerous dream. A time when heroes were not born of comfort but carved from hardship. This is the story of William Wallace, a name that echoes with courage, pain, and a fierce desire to see his homeland free. But this story is not just about battles or banners. It's about how one man's death was designed to silence an entire nation, and how, centuries later, it still whispers through the misty highlands of Scotland. William Wallace was not born into a royal house. He wasn't groomed to lead an army or make history. He came from the lowland nobility, a family of minor standing, not of great wealth or power. He was educated, likely fluent in Latin, and well aware of the world's cruelty. Scotland in his time was a land caught in the grip of foreign rule. The English crown, under King Edward I, also known as Longshanks, had claimed dominance over the Scots. Many noblemen submitted, some resisted. And Wallace, quiet at first, would become the loudest voice of them all. The events that turned him from farmer's son to national symbol began in shadows. Legend tells us that an English soldier killed someone close to Wallace. Others say it was the murder of his wife that lit the fire inside him. But what we do know is this: something changed. He began attacking English garrisons, leading small groups of rebels in quick, devastating raids. These weren't acts of madness. They were deliberate, strategic, each one a message. Then came the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297. Against all odds, Wallace and his forces defeated a much larger English army. It wasn't just a military win, it was a spark. Suddenly, Scotland had hope. Wallace was knighted and named Guardian of Scotland, but hope is fragile and victory never guaranteed. The English struck back harder. Wallace's army was eventually defeated at Falkirk. His support among the nobles faded, and he disappeared into the landscape that had always sheltered him. For years, Wallace became a ghost, appearing only in scattered whispers and fading reports. Some say he traveled abroad. Others believe he continued to resist in silence. But in 1305, he was betrayed, captured near Glasgow and delivered into English hands. His fate was sealed the moment his chains were locked. Yet what followed was more than punishment. It was a performance crafted to terrify. William Wallace was taken to London, not just for judgment, but for display. He was paraded through the streets, tied and dragged behind horses, while onlookers gawked. In that moment, he was no longer a man. He was a warning. At Westminster Hall, he was charged with treason. But Wallace replied with calm defiance. He denied the charge, not because he hadn't fought, but because he had never sworn loyalty to the English crown. To him, and to many Scots, he was no traitor. He was a patriot. But Edward's court had no interest in defense. The verdict was already decided. Wallace would be executed in a manner reserved for the worst criminals, an act of cruelty, crafted not just to kill, but to crush the spirit of any who dared follow his path. The sentence was death by hanging, drawing, and quartering, a punishment so calculated in its suffering that it was rarely used. But for Wallace, the English crown would make an exception. Now, in the soft calm of this moment, you may ask why such cruelty existed, why a government would go to such lengths. The answer lies not just in justice, but in fear. Wallace represented something more than rebellion. He embodied the idea that a single voice could challenge power, and those in power feared that idea more than swords or arrows. And so, on August 23, 1305, William Wallace was led to Smithfield in London, a place where crowds gathered not for peace but for spectacle. But as he stood there, he did not scream. He did not beg. Witnesses say he stared forward, silent, proud, and unbroken. Even in chains, he remained a symbol of defiance. The execution that followed was brutal, meant to be unforgettable. But we will not dwell on each detail tonight. This is not a story told to shock. It is a story told to remember, to remind us that behind every headline in history is a heartbeat, and behind every punishment, a message. Wallace's death was meant to silence his cause, but instead it carried his name through time. After his execution, his body was sent to different parts of Britain as a warning. His head was placed on a spike at London Bridge. His limbs sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Each piece carried a message from Edward: do not resist, do not rise. Do not believe that freedom is worth the cost. But history is not written only by kings. The people remembered, the land remembered. And in the quiet hills of Scotland, his story grew not weaker but stronger. As you rest now, and as sleep gently approaches, let your mind carry the image of a man who stood tall when it mattered most. Not for gold, not for glory, but for the simple belief that his country had the right to its own future. William Wallace lived not to be a hero but to be free, and in trying, he became both. The sun that rose after William Wallace's execution did not shine any brighter. The English crown may have believed it had extinguished a rebellion, but something far more powerful had taken root. Not a sword, not an army, but a memory, a whisper. A man's final stand echoing across time. As you lie in stillness, listening with gentle breath, know this: what happened after Wallace's death may be just as important as what led to it. Scotland mourned, though silently. Public grief could be dangerous. The message from London was clear: resistance would be met not only with defeat, but with desecration. And yet, in the villages, in the fields, and around flickering fires, Wallace's name was spoken, quietly, carefully, but it was not forgotten. He had died not as a traitor in the eyes of his people, but as a martyr. The English had hoped to erase his spirit by destroying his body. Instead, they had immortalized him, and the world noticed. Across Europe, word of Wallace's execution spread not because of the charges, but because of the cruelty. Many found the punishment excessive, even barbaric. Some questioned whether such brutality said more about the king than the accused. Among nobles and commoners alike, Wallace's final hours stirred something ancient, the belief that dignity in death could be more powerful than domination in life. But for Scotland, the road ahead remained dark. The country was divided, nobles bickered, loyalties shifted like shadows. Yet the memory of Wallace remained steady. It was not tied to castles or crowns. It lived in the hearts of those who still believed that their land could belong to them again. And not long after his death, another figure would rise, one inspired by the past. His name was Robert the Bruce. Bruce, a nobleman of ambition and complexity, had once sworn allegiance to Edward but would later become the King of Scots. And while Wallace had fought with raw defiance, Bruce would fight with strategy. He studied Edward's strengths. He learned from Wallace's downfall. And in 1314, 9 years after Wallace's execution, Robert the Bruce led the Scots to a stunning victory at the Battle of Bannockburn. That battle didn't end the war, but it shifted the tide. It reminded the world that Scotland was not broken, that Wallace's dream had not died in London. It had simply changed hands. And when the Declaration of Arbroath was written in 1320, Scotland's famous plea to the Pope for recognition of independence, Wallace's memory stood behind every word. Though he was never named directly, his sacrifice was there in the defiance, in the resolve, in the demand for freedom at any cost. Centuries passed. Monarchs came and went. Borders shifted. But Wallace's story lived on. It passed from father to son, mother to child. It was told in ballads and recorded in chronicles, and in time, myth mingled with truth. Legends grew. Some said he was 10 feet tall. Others claimed he fought hundreds alone. But beneath the stories, the core remained the man who refused to bow. And then, in the 1990s, his story found new voice. A film titled Braveheart, directed by and starring Mel Gibson, brought William Wallace to a global audience. The film was not entirely accurate. Many details were dramatized, changed, or imagined. But its spirit was powerful. It reignited global interest in Wallace's life and death. Millions around the world were moved by the image of a man shouting freedom with his final breath. And while historians debated the facts, the public embraced the feeling. At the site of his execution in Smithfield, London, a memorial now stands, simple, respectful, etched with words that recognize Wallace not as a rebel, but as a patriot. And in Stirling, near the battlefield he once claimed, a towering monument rises above the land. Inside it, his story is told again and again, proof that even those who die in chains can be remembered with honor. So what does all of this mean for us, lying now in peace, listening to history unfold in soft tones? It means that legacy isn't built only by winning. Sometimes it is built by standing. Sometimes the greatest act of power is not violence, but conviction. William Wallace lived in a time of darkness. He saw betrayal, brutality, and the weight of empire. But he still chose to fight. Not because he knew he would win, but because he believed his country was worth the risk. That belief, that freedom is more than a dream, is what carried his name through time. His execution, meant to instill fear, became a beacon of remembrance. And today, more than 7 centuries later, we speak his name not with dread, but with reverence. So sleep now calmly, knowing that even in the harshest chapters of history, there are glimmers of light. There are voices that refuse to be silenced. And there are stories like that of William Wallace that remind us of what it means to live with courage, and what it means to die for something greater than ourselves. He was a man. He was flawed. He made choices, and he paid for them. But in doing so, he taught the world that freedom, though often fragile, is always worth remembering. Let that truth carry you gently into sleep. And let the whisper of history stay with you, soft and steady, like the footsteps of a man who never stopped walking toward a freer world.